Welcome to the debate. Our source material gives us a remarkably candid blueprint for long-term language acquisition. It's a blueprint that, well, immediately dismisses the fantasy of magic shortcuts, the idea of learning while you sleep, and replaces it with a rigorous set of core principles: active practice, consistency, and patience. But what really stands out, I think, in this practical framework is the powerful elevation of emotional connection. So, the real pivot point for us today is deciding which element acts as the primary driver of sustained success. Is connecting English to personal passions, making it genuinely fun and personal, is that the essential non-negotiable ingredient that ensures adherence? Or is it merely a powerful tactic that relies fundamentally on the underlying foundation of structured, consistent effort? I firmly advocate that intrinsic enjoyment and fun, well, they're the ultimate secret to surviving the long journey.
I see. I come at it from a slightly different angle. I fully agree that enjoyment is a tremendous benefit, no question. But I will argue that the foundational requirements for achieving real measurable progress remain the tenets of discipline, active learning, and unshakable consistency. Enjoyment keeps the journey pleasant, absolutely, but discipline is the vehicle that ensures we actually arrive. The source material is pretty unequivocal on this, stating, real progress comes from real effort. So we really need to determine which principle is truly responsible for delivering that difficult, focused effort, day in and out, especially, when that initial rush of passion maybe fades.
Okay, well, my position is really based on what I see as the single greatest failure point in long-term learning: the fragility of motivation. The source is very clear that language acquisition is a marathon, right? Not a sprint. And the vast majority of learners quit due to burnout or, frankly, simple boredom. When the source explicitly states, if you are not having fun, you will not continue, it identifies passion not just as a nice-to-have, but as the gatekeeper of consistency itself. It's the mechanism that solves the adherence problem. When the learner links English to something they already love, be it music, games, cooking, history, whatever, the brain is described as happy. It is relaxed and open to new information. That emotional state is arguably a prerequisite for effective learning. It transforms the process from a boring, difficult chore into a genuine hobby. And that transformation isn't just a tactic. I believe it's the ultimate defense against failure.
That's a compelling argument regarding motivation, I'll grant you that. But I would frame it differently. Passion and fun are incredibly effective tools, yes, tools for implementation. But they aren't the structural necessity. The foundational mandate, as it's summarized in the source, is active, consistent, and enjoyable practice. Notice the order there. Active and consistent come before enjoyable. The core reason we reject the shortcut myth is because real progress comes from real effort. And the essential habit consistency, where practicing for just 15 minutes every day is explicitly noted as superior to intense sporadic efforts, is actually called the learner's best friend. So, discipline is what ensures the learner embodies the active participation the source demands: listening with focus, speaking with courage, reading with curiosity, and writing with purpose. That kind of difficult, focused engagement requires structure, I argue, not just desire.
Okay, but let's move beyond simply naming the principles and focus on their practical leverage, how they actually work. I believe the source elevates personal connection because it offers an immediate, significant return on investment. If you are learning a new language, specifically to consume content related to your passion, the learning becomes highly efficient and, well, sticky. For instance, the source notes that when learning is relevant, if you learn vocabulary about football because you love football, you will remember those words. The application and recall are almost automatic. You aren't fighting to memorize a flashcard. You're functionally acquiring the vocabulary because it matters right now to discuss the game or understand the commentary. It's immediately useful.
I see why you think that immediate functional acquisition makes passion primary. But that line of reasoning for me sort of bypasses the first foundational truth stated: there are no magic shortcuts. Accepting the necessity of effort must logically precede the discussion of how to make that effort more fun. Furthermore, you're kind of assuming the learner has a convenient, immediate passion that lines up perfectly with language learning. What about the millions learning English primarily for professional reasons or academic necessity or, immigration? Their motivation is high, sure, but it's often extrinsic. For them, there might not be a video game or a favorite song to lean on every single day. They need a structural framework, that consistent 15-minute drill routine, to bridge the gap until maybe potentially intrinsic interest develops later on. Discipline serves every learner, universally. Passion arguably only serves those whose hobbies align neatly.
I agree. Discipline certainly establishes a necessary initial framework, but I'd argue that without the emotional drive, that framework can quickly collapse under pressure. Discipline is finite. Willpower runs out. But let's take your example of the professional learner. Okay, their passion might not be a video game, but it is their career success, right? Their ability to negotiate, or their qualification for further study. The source encourages them to make it personal, which for them might mean analyzing English reports in their field or practicing presentations in English. The moment they connect the language skill directly to their professional ambition, the learning transforms from just a general skill into a personal mission. This intrinsic investment, I believe, is what sustains them through months of difficult grammar study, not just the routine itself.
That's a compelling reframing of passion, I admit, but it brings us precisely to the question of the quality of engagement required. The structure of the learning activity itself is paramount. Many passion-based methods, I worry, risk encouraging passive consumption rather than active skill building. If I love crime dramas and I simply watch them with subtitles because I already know the plot, well, that devolves pretty quickly into passive exposure. It violates the rule that you must engage your brain. My concern is that relying too heavily on passion often makes it easier to justify what is essentially low-effort intake. How does passion guarantee the learner is actually stopping, analyzing the structure, synthesizing new vocabulary, rather than just, enjoying the flow?
Well, the guarantee comes from the internal desire for mastery, which is driven by the passion itself. The examples given in the source are inherently active and analytical, aren't they? If you love a movie, you don't just watch passively. The source suggests you're driven to analyze favorite lines, maybe search for the script, or debate the subtext with other fans. Or take the music example. You are driven to find the lyrics, read them, translate them, and sing them. That process of translating and singing is physically engaging. It forces pronunciation practice. The motivation supplied by the passion drives the learner beyond passive reception to genuine active use and analysis, because the reward, that deeper appreciation of their passion, is immediate and self-reinforcing. It feeds itself.
I'm sorry, but I just don't quite buy that the motivation always translates into technical quality. I've seen countless learners passionately consume hours and hours of material, yet their actual fluency stagnates because they resist the difficult, sometimes non-fun tasks, the targeted vocabulary review, the explicit grammar drills, the self-correction of speech patterns. Passion is wonderful for retention of input, vocabulary related to the topic. I agree there. But output skill building, that often requires consistent, focused drilling, which can be tedious. And that consistent effort is dependent on structure, on discipline. And, the problem with relying purely on emotion is that it's structurally unreliable for what is fundamentally a multi-year effort. You mentioned the long journey. The source reminds us that bad days are inevitable, right? Days when the learner feels discouraged or like they have forgotten everything. What happens then? Passion can easily fail in the face of temporary failure or fatigue. So what sustains the effort through those dips? I argue it's the reliable habit established by consistency. Practicing 15 minutes every single day creates a kind of psychological floor. Discipline ensures that small, measurable progress accumulates, regardless of whether the learner felt particularly enthusiastic that morning. Habit, in the long run, is superior to inspiration when tackling a challenge of this length.
But that framework of discipline is, kind of useless if the learner quits after 6 months because they're just bored or feel like they're constantly fighting their own nature. Consistency is an operational method, yes, but passion is the fuel that ensures the long journey continues. It provides the necessary patience and self-compassion the source also emphasizes. If learning feels like an adventure, tied to exploring a deep personal interest, the learner accepts the bad days more readily. They are kind to themselves, as the source suggests.
If the learning remains just a chore, adherence becomes a function of sheer willpower. And we know from the source's dismissal of shortcuts that reliance on willpower alone is an unreliable, finite resource. It's often destined for failure. Transforming the learning into a passion, or connecting it to one, is the essential step to making the required effort truly sustainable.
And let's consider the source material's focus on celebrating small victories. You argue consistency builds these victories. I argue passion makes them feel much more significant. If I spend 15 minutes successfully discussing a complex playoff strategy in English with friends because I absolutely love sports, that victory is emotionally resonant. It instantly reinforces the desire to continue. If I spend 15 minutes successfully conjugating verbs in a textbook, while important, I don't deny that the emotional weight is less and the motivation to repeat that specific activity the next day might be lower. Passion, I think, multiplies the motivational impact of those crucial small victories.
That's an interesting distinction, the weight of the victory, though I would still frame the small, regular actions themselves as primary. Discipline builds the habit, and the habit guarantees the accumulation of small victories, whether they feel emotionally charged or not. And it's that steady accumulation of competency, the sense of tangible skill growth, that sustains motivation far more reliably, I believe, than an initial emotional burst. When we look at measurable metrics of long-term retention, those who maintain a daily routine, even a low-intensity one, consistently outperform those whose efforts are intense but sporadic, perhaps driven purely by high-energy passion phases. The map and the tools required for this journey are defined by consistency and active effort. Enjoyment is merely the, shall we say, welcome scenery along the way.
Okay, so to summarize my position, while the source absolutely demands effort and rejects shortcuts, the foundational challenge of language learning is adherence across time. Passion and enjoyment provide that essential emotional link that sustains motivation, ensuring the journey doesn't become a dreaded chore. By making English a deeply personal hobby, you kind of automate the necessary active practice and guarantee the learner will seek out the language relentlessly, thereby making success possible over the necessary extended duration. The emotional core is the ultimate secret weapon for longevity.
And my position remains that success is fundamentally built on the reality of real effort and the structural pillar of consistency. Enjoyment certainly accelerates the process and improves morale, no doubt, but it is the structured, active daily routine and the core recognition that progress is achieved through effort, not just desire, that truly form the map and tools required for the journey. We must prioritize the mandated active use of the language, and consistency ensures that effort is delivered reliably, independent of perhaps emotional fluctuation.
It seems we've clarified the fundamental tension then. Whether it's the energy source, the passion, or the structure of the engine, the discipline, that's really the key to completing this long journey.
Indeed, and the source material, I think we agree, successfully highlights the deeply interconnected nature of these principles. It really forces us, and hopefully our listeners, to consider the profound interplay between structural discipline and intrinsic desire in achieving linguistic mastery.